We all love the dwarves. Oh, hang on. There we go. We all love the dwarves, in one way or the other, and there is no arguing that. Unless you wanna go into the book, of course. I mean, they are stubborn, bearded warrior craftsmen. What's not to like? And you better believe that there was a time when the dwarf were the peak of civilization. Long before the Empire, Cathay, and humanity as a whole had even begun to develop anything beyond ape together strong. And so I bid thee welcome to a short, deep dive into the Dawi of Warhammer Fantasy, divided into 9 chapters of the, in my opinion, big events and origin that made the dwarfs into what we know them as today. Long before the world learned to wobble, explode, or be invaded by demons every other week, the dwarfs were already present in the mountains. Stubborn, broad, bearded, very annoyed that things weren't done properly yet, and clearly that wasn't acceptable. They called themselves the Dawi, and they lived in the Southlands, around here. Or here. It's not entirely clear. In the very, very early beginnings. However, what we do know is that they would eventually make their way northward and split into different clans, each led by a legendary dwarf who would later be venerated as the Ancestor Gods. But who were the Ancestor Gods? Well, the Ancestor Gods are the ones who shaped the Dawi into what we know today, although they might be a tiny bit more grumpy these days. But the foundations from the 3 gods are still very much visible. We begin with Grungi, father of the craft. Grungi taught the dwarfs that stone remembers, that a wall laid correctly will stand longer than kings, empires, and most marriages. He gave them metallurgy, engineering, and the sacred understanding that if something breaks, it is because it was made incorrectly. You see, dwarfs do not believe in good enough, they believe in done right. Following him, we come to Valaya, mother of the hold. Valaya taught them discipline, loyalty, and how to keep chaos out, a lesson the rest of the world skipped. You see, this is why dwarf holds don't spontaneously grow tentacles, unlike certain elven cities that shall remain nameless. She is also why dwarfs keep records, lock doors, wash corruption away with ritual, prayer, and extremely hot water. Valaya is also why dwarfs consider recklessness to be a moral failing. And last but not least, we have Grimnir, the problem child. Grimnir was one hell of a warrior, and he led the dwarfs on a conquest across the mountains of the old world, during which he also slayed the father of dragons. Grimnir then took one look at chaos and said, "I will be right back," and then he wandered into the chaos wastes to fight demons, and he never returned. From him come the slayers, oaths, and the dwarven belief that if something is dangerous, ancient, and angry, it should be fought face first. All in all, I would call that a balanced upbringing. Now that we know a bit about their origin, let's jump into chapter 2. In the Golden Age, the mountains were alive with purpose, not noise. Purpose. Every hammer strike had meaning. Every tunnel went somewhere important. Nothing was rushed, nothing was wasted, and nothing was built that wasn't meant to last until the end of the world. Or at least until the elves interfered. At their peak, the dwarf Carracks were not merely cities, they were civilizations folded inward, layer upon layer of stone, history, and stubborn genius. Above ground, the entrances were austere great gates of rune-etched iron, guarded and unwelcoming. It's like when Erebor is first described in The Hobbit, but bigger and a bit more serious. See? Just like that. Bigger and more serious. But below, oh mama! Imagine the scene in the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf says, let me risk a little more light, and they are in this vast hall that seem endless. Yeah, the characters of the Dawi are like that, but at least 10 times more impressive and dwarfified. And that's coming from someone who is a Lord of the Ring fan more than anything. Ancestor halls where the deeds of every clan were carved into the walls, market vaults echoing with trade in gold, gems, and masterwork arms. Roadways wide enough for wagons to pass underground for weeks without seeing sunlight. Vaults whose locks had never once been forced and would like to keep it that way. A dwarf could be born, live, work, drink, fight, and die without ever leaving the mountain and consider that a good life. Now that's a good life. You take that life, I don't blame you. That's a damn good life. This was also the age when dwarfs earned their reputation. Steel was folded until it remembered being sharp. Armor was balanced so perfectly it felt lighter than leather. And Gromril, the rarest of metals, was shaped with such care that every piece became a family relic. Nothing left a dwarf forge unless the smith could stand by it for eternity. You see, because if a flaw was found later, that shame belonged not just to the smith, but to his ancestors. That tends to focus the mind. However, despite their self-sufficiency, the dwarfs did not seal themselves away. Great roads ran from Karak to Karak, and out into the lands of men. Dwarf caravans were legendary. Slow, heavily guarded, and absolutely punctual. Humans brought grain, livestock, and manpower. Dwarfs brought tools, weapons, and knowledge. This is why early human kingdoms rose where they did, often at the mouths of dwarf holes. Under the silent protections of stone wall they didn't fully understand. Even though they were more technologically advanced and had probably more martial prowess than the early humans, the dwarfs didn't enforce their rule upon their lands, they simply supported them and expected payment. Properly recorded payment. And if you can believe it, there was a time, yes, it really happened, when dwarfs and elves were allies. They traded art for engineering, magic for metal. Even though dwarfs don't use conventional magic, elf gems were set into dwarf crowns, dwarf axes guarded elven caravans. This alliance may proven very useful, but it was never comfortable, because even though both races profited, they were very different. For instance, elves spoke in poetry, if you will, meanwhile dwarfs spoke in contracts. Still, for a while, it worked, and it worked rather well, which is why it hurt so deeply. You see, this age was many things, but most of all, the Golden Age was a time of certainty. The mountains were under dwarf control, the tunnels were secure, the gates were closed when they should be, and the ledges were balanced. Dwarfs knew who they were and where they stood in the world. They did not fear the future, they did not rush to meet it, because in those days the future looked very much like the past, and the past had been built correctly. This is why the loss of the Golden Age cuts so deep, not because the dwarfs lost power, but because they once had proof that the world could be made right, and then watched it slip, stone by stone, from their grasp. Ah yes, the great Book of Grudges. It is not just a book, it is a sacred duty, a legal document, and a family heirloom. It is a ledger so thick it could stop a cannonball, and so detailed it includes note like an elf ambassador failed to apologize sincerely, or some wassock raised their eyebrows too high. And if you ever get the chance to see how the Dawi write down their grudges, you'd notice a pattern. Every grudge includes the offender, the offense, witnesses, suggested recompense, margin notes added by later kings, like still unresolved or getting ridiculous now. Some grudges are past, like the loss of Carax, betrayals by allies, Calidor II, wars that reshaped continents. Others are specific. A merchant who cheated the scales, a gate left open, an elf who laughed. Even though it may seem like it to the one on the receiving end, grudges are not about vengeance. They are about balance. You see, the world tipped and it must be set right. And yes, those grudges must be settled eventually. Even if it takes 3,000 years and the collapse of civilization itself. Then came disaster. Earthquakes shattered the mountain roots, cataracts collapsed, tunnels caved in, trade routes vanished overnight, greenskins surged in howling waves, Skaven gnawed at foundations like diseased rats with engineering degrees. You see, the Dwarf Empire didn't fall in a single blaze of glory. It crumbled slowly and painfully. Entire dwarf kingdoms fell. Karak Eight Peaks, Karak Varn, Karak Azul, each loss etched into the book in angry runes. Messages stopped arriving, holds went dark, kings died without heirs, and the worst part, the dwarfs couldn't reclaim everything at once. They had to choose. Every abandoned hold was another grudge. Every lost ancestor hall, another wound. The dwarves did not adapt quickly. They do not do quickly. Instead, they did what the dwarves do best. They dug in, reloaded, and became even grumpier. And these days, they have a few scattered holds across the world in a desperate fight for survival. Now granted, those holds are strong, and Belegar is making slow progress at reclaiming Karak Eight Peaks, one hall at a time. A once mighty people brought low, but it matters not. Grudges must still be settled, greenskins must still be vanquished, and Skaven does still not exist, but must be removed nonetheless. Dwarf society is rigid, and this is intentional, just like anything the dwarfs do. A dwarf king rules by lineage, tradition, and the ability to sit very still for a very long period. A bad king is rare, but catastrophic. A good king, well, he remembers everything and forgives nothing. And then we have the High King, the ultimate authority, seated on the everlasting throne in Karasa Karak. His word is law, tradition, and legal precedent all at once. He also has the best or worst job in the world depending on your definition, deciding which grudges get settled first. Next in dwarf society we come to the clans and guilds. Let's start with clans. Clans define identity. A dwarf without a clan is a tragedy walking. Clans remember who forged which blade, who defended which gate, and who failed. They remember longer than anyone else. Kings may come and go, but clans are forever, unless something extremely terrible happens. Guilds, meanwhile, guilds are sacred. You do not dabble in dwarf craft. You apprentice for decades, perfect one skill, and do it the same way your ancestors did, unless you can prove an improvement beyond doubt. You see, dwarves admire innovation. They just don't trust it. Now, this may be overkill to put Slayers in a whole separate chapter, but I believe they are such an iconic role to their way of life, if you will, that they deserve it. I mean, the Gotrek and Felix novels are excellent points to why. When a dwarf is disgraced beyond repair for one reason or another, there is only one path left, the Slayer Oath. This is where a dwarf abandons family, clan, and safety to seek a glorious death in battle. Not suicide, but atonement. Slayers are tragic figures, but also terrifying. They fear nothing, they smile at dragons, and they complain when monsters die too easily. Just ask Gotrek, probably the worst dwarf to ever take on the oath, because he refuses to die. Or, well, He hasn't come up against anything that could muster the martial prowess to kill him, rather. Other dwarves respect slayers deeply, but stand slightly away from them. Because, well, Grimness fire burns hot, to say the least. Dwarves do not wage flashy wars. They wage inevitable ones. They built lines with iron breakers, thunderers, and organ guns, and with said lines they fortify their positions, and they advanced step by grinding step. Their armies are slow because they are meant to arrive. Maybe not on your time schedule, but they will arrive nonetheless. And their artillery is even slower, but it matters not, since they only need to fire once in order to remove a problem forever. Their infantry do not break. You see, when a dwarf retreats, it is because the enemy has already lost and doesn't know it yet. It is just that the final cannonball hasn't landed yet. Magic is distrusted for obvious reasons. Now runes on the other hand, runes are trusted because they are hammered into reality and cannot lie. A runesmith will hammer his anvil and either his iron breakers become literally blocks of iron with axes, or their enemies will A. either explode, or B. lose control over their will to move. And the best part, no demons will just randomly appear. And if you've played Total War, you know this to be true. You are basically playing auto chess whenever you finish your deployment. And unless you are playing a quest battle or the enemy has reinforcements arriving on the flanks, you can 90% of the time just press start, sit back and wait for the victory screen. The only time you'd actively use any unit would probably be your runesmith for shits and giggles, or if your range units decide I can't shoot because Warhammer 3 is functioning as intended, makes an appearance. Now the tabletop I would imagine is a bit more involving of the player, but I would not know since I chose the Middle Earth game to what now feels like an eternity ago. Humans, useful, fragile, die too easily, however they are good customers. Elves, graceful, arrogant, long-lived mistakes. There was an incident, we do not speak of it. Greenskins, loud, numerous, incorrect, must be exterminated. Loudly, Skaven, do not exist, but must also be exterminated. Chaos, the enemy forever, absolute hatred, no forgiveness, ever. Dwarfs do not seek domination, unless we're talking about Total War. However, what they do seek is closure for all transgressions. To be a dwarf is to live with the weight of ages on your shoulders, and consider that comforting. Your ancestors are watching, your descendants are waiting, and your actions will be remembered. A dwarf might let a joke, if you told it in a very well-mannered fashion, slide. However, they do not forget, they do not forgive, they do not hurry. They will outlast you, they will outbuild you. And somewhere in a vast stone hall, a scribe sharpens his chisel, because if you wrong a dwarf, they will write it down. And that is why the dwarves are the way they are. They may be grumpy and easy in your eyes to anger, but there is reason behind it, and many years of them being proven right. So next time you encounter a dwarf, just be respectful, and all will be well. Probably.